ProCognita, Get Agile podcast.
It's not about the software. Interview with Mary and Tom Poppendieck.
Welcome to Get Agile podcast, and today with me is Mary and Tom Poppendieck, people who brought Lean into the software development. So you were able to translate what is Lean and how to use it in software development. So I'm going to start with the very first question, which is...
Well, let me say hello first, so we can...
I'm sorry about this one. So yeah, we're doing this remotely. So this is the first Get Agile remote we're doing remotely. And if we don't get into the question from the very beginning, I want to point to everyone the pictures behind Tom and Mary, which are from Tom's photos and their trips. So I'm gonna start with this one before we get to the question. All right, so coming back to the very first question, we had a conversation before this interview about the topic, and what we said is it's already 20 years since Mary and Tom introduced what is Lean into the software development. So you did a few books on translating the ideas from Lean and the principles from Lean. We get 40 years by now of hearing and knowing about the Toyota production system in production. So the very first question is, how do you see the world change? So what is the difference between now and 20 years ago or 10 years ago from the Lean perspective?
Well, it's a very good question, because in the software world, I really think that anything that's 10 years old is out of date, and anything that's 20 years old is hopelessly obsolete. So if you start looking at what worked 20 years ago, it was a reaction to what was going on at the time. If you start looking at what worked 40 years ago, it was a reaction to what was going on at the time. If we look at the origin story of Lean, it was born after the Second World War in Japan by a guy who said, we should be able to make our own cars here in Japan and provide jobs for Japanese people, and we should be able to figure out how to do that with our own engineering talent. And so they worked in that starting in the late 30s, and then after the war they started again and tried to figure out how to make cars, where everybody said, just buy them from Detroit. And Kiichiro Toyota said, no, I want to figure out how to do this. So he started by selling just a few cars, because there weren't nobody had any money and there weren't many orders for cars. And so they had to figure out how not to make them the same way they made them in Detroit, where there was big piles of inventory and great big stamping stations and stuff like that, because they could only make a few cars at a time because they only got a few orders at a time. And the origins of Lean were really born out of necessity of the situation. In order to provide customers with the cars they wanted and good jobs for the people around, it was necessary to do just a few things at a time and not to gather big piles of inventory in between. It was necessary to constantly improve on the design, because the first design wasn't all that great. And they learned that this whole concept of just-in-time and rapid flow actually worked better than the way that they were doing things in the US. That's the origin story of Lean. Now, if we look at the origin story of Agile, we go to the mid-90s, and we have some people that were working for, what's the company? Tektronix. In the Portland area, and Rebecca Rock was the manager, and Kent Beck worked there, and Ward Cunningham worked there, and they came up with a better way to think about how you do software than all this big, heavy upfront planning, because they had to, because it was in a hardware environment in addition to software, and they needed to get stuff done faster. Eventually, that group broke up. Kent Beck went into consulting and started working for a company in Detroit, in Chrysler, and he brought together a lot of his old friends, and they did a project there. And that was the origin of the book XP Explained. And if you think about that book, which came out in 2000, the subtitle was Embrace Change. And it was all about how to do software in an environment of rapid change. And he had some rules because it was a process description. People don't know it, but they completed that project at Chrysler the way they were supposed to. It got done, it was fine, but it never actually got used because it wasn't really, although it did what the spec said, it didn't really do what the customers needed. So he wrote up a book called XP Explained, and Scrum in many senses is a spin-off from that, taking all the technology parts out and only keeping the process parts in. So that's where this whole area of Agile came from, a reaction to the way things were done, and they weren't working, using some new technology and new ideas. How do we solve today's problems, which don't, under the constraints that we have, which don't match yesterday's problems? Then if you go to 2010, you see that we have the whole concept of continuous delivery on a pipeline. And one of the companies, interestingly enough, that embraced that with a great big wholehearted embrace was Amazon, AWS, Amazon Web Services. They were just getting started, and they found that if they allowed their teams to have pipelines, they could be much less distracted on the deployment, and they could spend all of their time adding new code. So Amazon Web Services was one of the first environments in which very rapid delivery happened. But you have to realize that Amazon was sitting in an environment where they had whole teams. The whole teams were given a service, a whole problem to solve. They typically, to figure out what to do next, they wrote a press release, and they had a metric or two or three, which they had to meet to see if what they were doing was in fact solving the customer's problems. So there you had complete teams. So this is a step beyond focusing on just the development to focusing on the customer and the problem again. And the constraints there were to make the team able to be delivering much faster with more productivity on the part of the developers. So they didn't have to focus their time and attention on the releases. They could focus their time and attention on new stuff. And Amazon developed tools for very rapid pipeline delivery, Amazon Web Services, which they use to this day. But before they developed those tools, they had changed the paradigm from Agile in software development to Agile teams that focus on providing a service to customers. Now, if you come here to 2020, another decade later, and what you discover is we've just gone through some really big black swan events, and everything that was supposed to be, different, everything that was thought of as the plan for this year is sort of gone, and massive amounts of changes have happened over the last, say, 3-4 months. And this is around the world. Now, anytime you have changes that involve software, you have to have rapid software changes too. For example, massive supply chain realignments had to happen in order to serve people that were in a different location, in order to get different kinds of materials from different sources because that source was closed. And all of those supply chain realignments required some amount of very nimble software changes in order to make them happen.
So what you're saying, so if I get it correctly, is like when we change the technology, then the way we need to manage the software change as well. So what I'm hearing is not just about changing the technology itself. So you're saying, okay, over the decades that's changed. Yes, we know this change, and when we have different tools that we used to have 10 years ago, despite we still try to introduce some of these ideas to some of the teams. But what you're saying is also when you change the technology, then you need to change the way you manage the software development, right?
I don't actually talk about managing the software development. I would rather talk about managing the problem-solving process. So what we're talking about here is every decade you have a new set of problems that you have to attack. And one of the things that we've been operating under for the last 10, 20 years is that software underlies almost everything that we do. Increasingly, we are dependent upon it. When we have to do things differently and change rapidly, we have to be able to change the software as just a part of that. Like, you know, I drive to my local store. Tom and I do not go into any other buildings except our own house. So how do we shop? Because our children are not local and we have a car. So we're living in a suburb. Every single place of business around us has something called curbside pickup. Go online, order what you want, get in your car, drive up, call inside on the cell phone. They bring out your bags, put them in your car, and you go home. You've already paid online. So no contact, no receipts, and every single business anywhere in my area, I can do that. Now, that wasn't possible 4 months ago. There were 2 high-end grocery stores that had curbside pickup for a very limited number of their customers. And in 4 months, every single business, big and small around us, figured out how to make that one of the key parts of the way that they sell and deliver their goods. And you can bet that there was software involved, but there was so much more than software. I mean, the problem with the stores that already had this was they didn't have the storage space for the massive increase in demand. They didn't have the personnel on hand that could handle all of the additional shopping and bagging that had to be doing, and then the delivery to people. They didn't have the capacity to handle people driving up all of the time. They got it fast. Part of it was software. Part of it was HR. Part of it was all kinds of, how do we hire different people? They didn't have to change their supply chain too much because same store, same stuff, but they really had to change their operational practices. And if you think of a team that's going to put together a curbside pickup, it's not just software people. Yeah, there have to be software changes, and there have to be people changes, and there has to be thought about how the operations are going to work, and where are we going to store the cold stuff so that it doesn't spoil, and all that sort of stuff had to be done in a week. Okay? Yeah. And in a week, you got to get together all the people involved. They've got to sit in a room, and they got to figure it out, and then they all have to do their piece and make it happen. It's a whole story. And software is just a piece of it. And the software people are sitting on their team, and when they know what is possible in software, they go ahead and do it. At the same time, they're coordinating with the other people on the team that are figuring out how to hire the people, where to do the storage, all that sort of stuff. So we're talking about teams that are solving customer-focused problems, which happen to have people that do software as members of the team. And that's the change that's got to happen across the world, as we have to, and if you look at AWS, this is the change that they made about 10, 12 years ago, is they stopped thinking about software development and started thinking about teams that solve customer problems. And we have to start thinking about teams that solve customer problems. That's what we have to do.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask a more difficult question, I guess. If all the shops, all those companies around in Minnesota reacted the same way, so all of them, you can pick up your shopping you do online. How do we differentiate the more lean than the less lean companies? And can we talk about this one? What is the differentiator on the market right now? What is the difference you have over the other companies right now? What is being lean, more lean than other?
So if everybody allows curbside pickup, how do they differentiate?
Yeah. So we don't know if all of those companies were using the lean ideas or other ideas for the development. Maybe that was like a chaos development, like just do it, the kind of development, or no process development, right? How do we know that?
It doesn't matter.
Why does it matter? What matters? No, there is definitely differentiation between the different curbside pickups. I know which ones are good, which ones are convenient, which ones work well, which ones I get the best product from, which ones I have the best grocery shoppers at. And by experience of using different ones, I know which ones are preferable and which not. We actually had to change a state law to allow curbside pickup of liquor, because you had to go in and show your driver's license. Now today I can go pick up, I will go pick up some bottles of wine without having to go inside. But everyone is different. Everyone has different software. Some of the software is totally amazing. When a shopper starts shopping, they say your shopper is starting. When the shopper comes upon something I ordered and it's not there, I immediately get a message through the app saying, here, I would like to substitute this. Would you approve? Some, who knows what they're going to put in there. Some allow you, most of them allow you not to allow substitutes. Some allow you to put in notes. So some call you as soon as it's packed. Some you schedule a delivery, pickup slot. Some you do all your ordering on the phone because that's pretty much all you can do. And because they didn't get too sophisticated, but they got something that works. Some, the delivery process takes 20 minutes because they don't have their act together on that. So there's very, very different implementations. Some of the teams have the right combination of things to make it much easier than others. And I used to go to all these different stores to shop. Now I shop at maybe 2. And that's it. And it's because they found the kind of process that works best for us. So there's definitely competitive differentiation here, but it's not just the software. It's how the team thinks about how the whole solution works with software. If you're sitting there, you've got to know what software is capable of in order to come up with the concept of sending me a message with some pictures of the possible substitutes. You've got to figure out how that can be done. And so there's a whole lot of stuff that needs to change, but it's a team solving a problem. It isn't like a software team doing a piece of a problem. And I think we've got to switch from software groups doing a piece of a problem to whole teams solving complete problems.
So I guess this answers the Tom question, who cares? Customer cares. And the second,
if you go back 30, 40 years, Deming wrote that the purpose of a business is to create customers. Now, if you're going to create customers, you have to discover what they need. The first step is always discover a need. And in the case of the curbside pickup, that has been pretty obvious. And then within the constraints that the organization operates in, you have to figure out a solution. And that solution can be better or worse, depending on the particular customer segment that you are attempting to develop. It's not a matter of just having the flashiest software. It's a matter of having the best experience for the entire shopping undertaking. And the same is true for any kind of software. And it always has been. But the approaches that we used to use, where someone else was responsible for guessing what the customer problem is, and then handing it off to the geeks to implement exactly what they were told, and then blame the geeks because it didn't work the way they imagined it would, which led to the XP and all of the customer bill of rights and all of that, which of course was also a mistake, because if the decisions about what is worth building are not made with a very close knowledge of the experience that the customers need to address their problems, they're going to be made in very ineffective ways.
Can I add on that with continuous delivery now pretty much being the standard of the way things are done, really honest way things ought to be done anyway, what you have is in software something that can change rapidly, adapt to see how much faster you can make the customer experience better. And so if you look at AWS, they developed pipelines for rapid delivery so that the teams could get very fast feedback on some little thing that they wanted to try to see how well it worked. and that they didn't have to think about the deployment. It just was carefully handled by the pipeline. But the team was constantly getting feedback on all of these little experiments that they were trying so that they could improve and improve and improve on what they were doing. That is sort of the glory, the value of software. Software allows constant improvements, constant feedback to the team so that things can constantly get better. Now, when we had great big release processes and even 2-week release processes, we didn't have enough feedback on small ideas to be able to have the team figure out on an ongoing basis what makes the customer happier, what accomplishes our goal better, what kinds of things should we change next. And so there was a proxy in there in between the team trying to solve the problem and the customer. And it's time to get rid of the proxy, and with continuous delivery and constant feedback to the team, we give the team a whole problem. A metric that says, here, you're going to know if this customer's happy if you're doing this important thing that the customer wants to. So the team is given a mission couched in terms of customers having some benefit, and they know if they've done it by seeing whether or not that benefit is achieved. And that's where the very rapid feedback comes in, because it helps them figure out whether or not things are getting better. Doesn't mean that these teams don't have leaders. If you look at AWS, all teams have leaders, but the leaders have responsibility for the successful metrics of their product. Does their product make customers happy? Does the product, are the customers intrigued by it, interested in using it, that sort of thing. And so if you think about the team using constant feedback to rapidly, from a very good technical process, which allows very rapid delivery, then you can think of a whole team tackling a problem, because it's software-based, constantly improving upon their solution on a very rapid and ongoing and safe basis. And to me, that's where things are heading. That's where most cloud applications have to be just in order to live in the cloud. And I think that that's today's sort of reality of how things are done. So in a very real sense, this builds on all the good stuff of Lean and of Agile and all of the stuff that made sense. Like Lean has this idea of constant flow. Agile has this idea of small, responsible teams. Very good and important ideas, but you gotta have the customer in there and the team responsible for making that customer happy in some well-defined manner, because the team has maybe written a press release or have some metrics that say this is what good is. When a team has that, they can make lots and lots of decisions, and when they have the various people from the various areas, they can make all sorts of good decisions about how to improve upon the customer's experience or the customer's usefulness to the customer of their product.
So discovering and delivering products that are valued by customers is not easy. The only really powerful way of addressing that is to learn rapidly, to learn at low cost, to do a bunch of experiments that will maximize the amount that you learn. Your metric for success is, have you delighted customers? It's not how much money did you make. Of course, you have to make enough money to stay in business, to support your organization, but it's the delight of the people who are benefiting from your efforts that really matters, not how much your bottom line has improved.
So there was one thing you said just a few minutes before, Mary, which was that continuous delivery is a common approach. I would say it should be a common approach. I'm not quite sure this is a common approach. And this is exactly the same with the other stuff, like having a contact of the team with the user, having metrics to decide what to do next. That should be a common approach, but still we have a different proxy. Still we have a metrics like a velocity. Still we have people put between the user and the team. We call them analytics. We used to call them analytics. Now we call them product owners with the quotation. Yeah, still progress, right? So how do you see it? Are we going in the right direction, or are we still waiting for those companies could?
What do you mean by we? Okay, I say we are into a continuous delivery process where we have whole teams, and you say, oh no, we have proxies and we have not continuous delivery. And
I'm saying we have both. And what is dominant on this market is
here's the thing. In a rapidly moving environment, the ones that can respond fastest to real customer needs and make customers happy eventually win. And we've seen over the last 20 years, industry after industry get this. Banks used to be about the slowest industry there was in making changes until it turns out they had to start having apps on phones. And all of a sudden they were able to do things rapidly. Oh, that isn't software, they said. They put it off in a different department. But no, it turns out you need to change the back end too. So the ones that are really thriving are the ones that have figured out how to make it work. Telecom companies have been basically privatized from being government entities to being private entities. And and this has happened in countries around the world, and when that happens, now you have an old fogey institution having to figure out how the heck to compete. And some compete a whole lot better than others. There's a New Zealand telecom that's done some amazing things, and it's done it through figuring out how to create teams that can rapidly respond to real customer problems. So I believe the competitive environment is going to eat the ones that don't figure out how to have rapid customer response. And meanwhile, I prefer to pay attention to the ones that want to figure out how to make customers happy and move ahead. And so I don't know on the percentage-wise what percentage of teams have the old style way of doing things. But I do know that if you look at the successful companies, very large amounts are doing continuous delivery, whole teams without proxies, and that sort of thing. Because that's what works. Because that's what allows for rapid movement in today's age. And things are not going to get any slower. I've been in this business for, I don't know, over 50 years. And things have never gotten slower. They've always gotten faster. And so the companies that are going to stay in the 2000s and 2010s and be caught back in those paradigms, fine, but they got some competition that's going to outstrip them fast. And at some point, they're either going to have to make the leap or they're going to find they're eaten up by somebody else.
They won't make it to the 30s.
So we see this on telco, we see this slowly happening for banks, we see this for the private companies sending people to their orbit station. So yeah, most likely we're going to see this more often than some companies would like to. So any recommend for the closes of this interview, any recommendation for those companies who are not there yet?
I think that they need to figure out what it is about their industry that's going to change fast. Let me just give one last industry. This is the insurance industry. Smart senior executives in some insurance companies have thought about this and said, guess what? We manage risk. And guess what? If you have IoT and artificial intelligence out there, those kinds of tools can manage risk a whole lot better than all the algorithms we ever used to use in order to manage risk. And if we don't figure out how to get on that bandwagon, the bandwagon is going to pass us up. Now, not all insurance companies have figured that out, but the smart ones at the senior executive level, they get that. They don't quite know how to get it down to the bottom levels yet in many cases, but they get that managing risk has become a much different process than they have been doing for the past few decades. And they know they have to change. Now, if you can find companies that know they have to change because the world is changing fast, those are the companies that are going to figure out how to hop on and do things. I don't think you can go fast because it's interesting, or go fast because people like it, or have agile processes because they're nice for developers. I think you need to go fast because you have customers that demand it, because your old style of doing business won't survive. And so the first thing you have to think about is, what does my company do? Who's going to do it better than me if we don't figure out a better way of doing things? And that's your sell. That's what you can sell to anybody that's willing to understand that in order to survive in the future, you're just going to have to do things differently. People don't do stuff now that they used to do 20 years ago. You'd laugh at a 6-month delivery cycle, but in 1999, 6 months was blazingly fast. Okay? A 3-year delivery cycle, I just don't see those anymore. These very long release processes, they're gone. Okay? Now that doesn't mean people are doing.
You might be surprised in a way.
Well, I might.
Not giving the names.
Gone, okay?
The best developers will not tolerate that kind of environment. And the developers who are not the best are not going to produce competitive products.
Yeah, this is what I'm hearing often from the technical coaches, is that if you have a poor code, then you need to hire technical coaches from outside, because the people who care about the code, they already left your company, right?
Interesting. Yes.
Thank you very much for this conversation. I really enjoyed the time with you, and hope to see you someday in Poland, hopefully after this pandemic.
Once we get this whole virus thing cleared up, maybe vaccine or something like that, then we get to travel again, and we kind of miss it.
Yay, back to normal.
Well,
Yep.
a little bit.
It'll be a new normal.
It'll be a new normal.
New normal. Okay.
To learn more, visit procognita.com/getagile.